Welcome to the Explainer. So, the trial of former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro is in full swing. But is it actually a proper legal proceeding? Well, according to constitutional law professor André Marsiglia, the whole case is built on 5 major errors that could make the entire process invalid. Let's dig into his analysis. All right, so what's the core argument here? It's that this trial, it's not really about the law at all. It's about politics. And according to this analysis, if you see it that way, every other detail of the case starts to look a whole lot different. To really get this political trial idea, you just have to look at this quote from Marsiglia himself. He says, "A political process starts from the end. You convict, then you go back justifying the conviction." So the argument is that the outcome was decided from the get-go, and everything else is just working backward to make it look legitimate. And this visual really lays it out perfectly. A normal legal process, right? It works like this. You start with evidence and you follow it to a conclusion. Simple. But the claim here is that Bolsonaro's trial is flipped on its head. It started with the conclusion, guilty, and is now working backward to find the justifications. So, you might be asking, what's the proof for this whole inverted process idea? Well, the analysis starts by pointing to 2 huge structural flaws. First, the court where it's being held, and second, who's actually on the bench. Okay, so error number 1, the wrong jurisdiction. The big question is why this case is even being heard in Brazil's highest court, the Supreme Federal Court, or STF, in the first place. According to Marsiglia's analysis, this case really belongs in a lower court. See, in Brazilian law, there's this thing called foro privilegiado. It's like a privileged forum that sends top officials straight to the Supreme Court. But the argument here is that it just doesn't apply to the people being charged in this case. So right from the start, just by being in the STF, the whole trial is on shaky ground. And the second structural error, he argues, isn't just which court is hearing the case, but how many judges are making the call. You see, for a case of this scale, think about the famous Mensalon corruption trial. You'd expect the full court, all 11 justices, to weigh in. But in this trial, the decision is in the hands of a single panel of just 5 judges. That's less than half the court deciding on a case about a former president and an alleged coup attempt. Pretty big difference. And this leads Marsiglia to ask a really sharp question. If a supposed coup attempt isn't important enough for the full court to hear, then what exactly is the Supreme Court for? All right, so moving on from the structural problems, the analysis then gets into the substance of the case itself. And here it flags 3 more errors, this time about the judges, the actual charges, and what even counts as a crime. So, error number 3 is all about the judges themselves being suspect. The analysis claims that this 5-judge panel just isn't neutral because several of them have what looks like a direct conflict of interest. In fact, if you look at this chart, the claim is that a majority of the panel, that's 3 out of the 5 judges, are considered suspect, meaning their ability to be impartial is seriously in question. So why are they considered suspect? Well, here are the specific conflicts being alleged. Justice Alexandre de Moraes is actually named as an alleged victim in the plot. Then you have Justice Flavio Dino, who has personally sued Bolsonaro in the past. And finally, Justice Cristiano Zanin, who was actually the opposing lawyer in legal fights against Bolsonaro. You can see why questions of bias might come up. Okay, on to the 4th error, and this one is about the charges themselves. We're talking about potential sentences of 30 to 40 years here, so the stakes are incredibly high. The legal concept we're talking about here is known as this an item. It's Latin, and it basically means twice for the same thing. You might know it as double jeopardy, the idea that you can't be punished twice for the exact same crime. So how does that apply here? Well, Marsiglia argues that charging someone for both a coup d'etat and the violent abolition of the state is basically the same thing. His logic is pretty straightforward. You can't really have a coup without trying to abolish the state, right? He says it's the same act, so charging for both is like a form of double punishment. And now, for the 5th and final error identified in this analysis, and it's a big one. It's the argument that this entire case is criminalizing actions that should be protected under free speech. The analysis claims that the main things being prosecuted here, making online posts, holding meetings, even just tossing around ideas, are not actually crimes. The argument is that they are, in fact, constitutionally protected rights under freedom of speech and freedom of thought. Okay, so if this trial really has all of these alleged errors, both in its structure and in its substance,
The analysis comes back to one final question. What's the real objective here?
And this brings us right back to that first big idea. The analysis concludes that these aren't just a series of mistakes. Instead, they are deliberate parts of a political process designed to do one thing: to banish Bolsonaro and his political movement, Bolsonarismo, from having any influence in future elections.
So, this whole analysis really leaves us with a much bigger, more provocative question that's at the very heart of this debate. In any democracy, really, where do you draw the line between political speech and a criminal act? And maybe even more importantly, who gets to draw it?